Hello and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be back here at the UN, and thank you for joining us. We obviously have a very important UN Security Council meeting on the Middle East, and I just wanted to make a few remarks, and then I think we'll have an opportunity for a few questions as well. First and foremost, we are all very much seized of the continuing situation and humanitarian suffering of innocent Palestinians in Gaza. And therefore, the United Kingdom is now clear that we need an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. Last month, my friend and colleague, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and I visited Al-Arish near the Rafah crossing, where, amongst others, we met with the Egyptian Red Crescent Society staff who are working tirelessly to get life-saving aid into Gaza. And if I may say, I want to pay particular tribute to those incredible people, volunteers, who are playing and often putting their own lives at risk to deliver humanitarian support to the people in Gaza. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza, as we all recognize, is worsening daily. Suffering is frankly unacceptable, and our priority must be to alleviate it with immediate effect. For our part, the United Kingdom is working with partners to help build a plan to move from that humanitarian agreements that we see, allowing those pauses to become a sustainable, permanent ceasefire without a return to hostilities. What would this mean? Well, such a plan would require that Hamas agree to the release of all hostages. Secondly, that Hamas no longer be in charge of Gaza, and the threat from Hamas terror and rocket attacks would have to end. Equally important is that there would be an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza in order to provide governance, services, and increasingly security. Equally important is that we now see a real commitment from all countries towards the delivery of the two-state solution. It is our view, and I know it's a view shared by many, that this conflict must not go on for a moment longer than necessary. An immediate pause is now necessary to get, as I've seen myself, the vital life-saving aid in and get the hostages out. I've met, along with Lord Cameron, some of the hostage families, and we know of their suffering. We've also met with Palestinian families who have left Gaza, and we know of their suffering. Peace remains the only way to end this human tragedy and suffering that has engulfed Israelis and Palestinians once and for all. Therefore, it is incumbent on all of us to work together to make that vision for peace a living reality. At the Security Council, we've seen, and the United Kingdom worked hard in achieving the support for the resolution, that we can achieve unity and purpose about what needs to happen and happen now. What needs to happen now to relieve the humanitarian crisis and to start working towards that sustainable, permanent ceasefire. So I'm here today in this important open debate as the United Kingdom's Minister of State, but also with the Minister of State for responsibility for the Middle East, to ensure that we once again underline our support for the vision turning into a reality of a two-state solution. And that will be the only way we will see lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you so much. Sir. If I may, Talal Saab, please.
Thank you, Lord Ahmed. And my name is Talal Haj from Al Arabiya and Al Hadath Networks. With regard to Gaza, isn't it time for us to move away from counting trucks, which are, by all estimates, drops in the sea, to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people, to a real political process that stop the bombings, ensure a ceasefire, and stop the killing in Gaza of civilians, innocent civilians? And on the other hand, I would like to ask you on Yemen, how do you see the Red Sea saga developing. And the Houthis are continuing in their actions, which we can describe as terrorist action against international navigation and marine trade. But also it threatens to be a regional, expanding the regional war way beyond Palestine and Israel. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. First of all, the quick response to your first question is yes, we want to see that political process. And that is why the United Kingdom, along with other partners, the United States and indeed other key countries within the region, most importantly, are working to that end. You know, the human suffering, and I speak as a father, I speak as someone who knows the region extremely well. How can someone not be totally taken by the horrifying suffering we've seen? When I sit down and I see that suffering, when I read the reports, it's vital, and that should be impetus enough. And all of you have a very important role in your reporting, objectively, based on facts and evidence, to ensure the information is on there. And yes, hold all countries accountable to ensure we come together. I've always been clear, as has the Foreign Secretary, that we need to ensure every country that has whatever equity currently in play to allow that situation, that political discourse to return the peace and stability and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, need to make that happen. That's why the important discussions on hostages is important. That's why recently when we visited the region, and I know the Foreign Secretary is visiting again this week, I will be returning to the region next week, is that we continue to press for the opening of Kerem Shalom with Israel to ensure the level of humanitarian support. And I agree, this shouldn't be, oh, isn't it great, we've got 5 more trucks in. This is about people's lives. Every single life matters. And yes, it may not happen overnight, but through our words and actions, if we can save the life of a single soul, it's worth it. On the issue of the Houthis specifically, yes, of course, and you would have seen the United Kingdom when we've taken part in the operations. This is one of the main world shipping lanes. About 15 to 20% of the world shipping goes through there. This has implications on prices in people's pockets, the price people pay. The Houthis have targeted quite specifically, and when the United Kingdom first joined the operation, they specifically targeted HMS Diamond. So we want to be very clear. We don't want to see any escalation. We don't want to see this conflict continuing. And I think the Houthis have it. There was some good progress being made with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to bring peace to Yemen. We want to see that track re-established, and they can end this right now. If I come to Edith, good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. 2 questions following up. The Israelis have reportedly proposed a 2-month ceasefire during which all the hostages would be released and Palestinian prisoners would be released as well, with a few other caveats. What is the UK's reaction to that proposal? And also, the UN has confirmed that it's received a letter from the Houthis ordering all UK and US nationals working for the United Nations and NGOs to leave the areas they control in northern Yemen. What is the UK's response to that?
Well, first of all, on your first question, I think I have seen the press reporting on that, and I would go back to what the UK position is. When we saw that one pause that we did see some goodwill prevail. We did see hostages being released. We did see aid entering, and that's why we now call for that immediate humanitarian pause, because it means hostages can get out. And I pay tribute to those working. The state of Qatar, I know, are involved, along with Egypt, together with Israel on that point. But it will also mean that we see the alleviation of the suffering of the ordinary civilians, Palestinians, particularly when you see 70% of the women and children that have been caught up and killed in that particular conflict. It's important we also make sure that element delivers. On the second point, I'll be quite frank with you. I think the United Nations, for all its challenges it faces in the world, I defy anyone to say, is there an organization that brings together, as it's doing again today, on this important issue, nations of the world? We may have our challenges, we may have our contrarian views, we may have differences, but the UN does an incredible job on the ground, and it's done that in Yemen. So I'd say a simple message for the Houthis is, let people who often put their own lives at risk to get on with the job to help alleviate suffering around the world. And if it's in Yemen or elsewhere, let people get on with the job. And on Gaza, that's why David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, has also said, when we call for a sustainable ceasefire, that means not just trucks getting in, as we heard earlier. It's about ensuring those trucks are protected, the staff are protected, and to ensure they have the fuel and what's necessary in terms of logistics to allow them, as the UN does incredibly around the world, to do its job. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lord Ahmed. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News.
Good to see you again, Pamela.
Yes, nice to see you. A quick follow-up on Yemen. There have been, as far as I'm counting, 8 missions of the US, UK and US attacking sites in Yemen. Is there any sense that the message is getting through? And if not, including the letter that Edie talked about, is there a sense that this will continue? Thank you.
Well, I think as I said earlier, on the whole issue of Israel and Palestine, we need to look at who has what equity. And I think there are countries in the region, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that have the ability and have demonstrated in recent months that peace with the Houthis is something that's a track that can be attained and achieved. The Houthis, as I said, can stop this today. And let's not forget, they themselves have launched over 26 attacks on commercial shipping, not on military shipping, on commercial shipping, but they have escalated that to include British ships. We want to see a de-escalation. We do not want to see that issue in any way being conflated with what we're dealing with, from those shocking attacks on the 7th of October to where we are today in Gaza. One thing is very clear for every Israeli and Palestinian: peace is the only course forward. Let's get focused on what needs to happen on the ground, and that's where the United Kingdom is working.
Sir, one more question, sir. One more question, sir.
Yeah.
The IRGC, Britain has called on nations to list the IRGC as a terror organization. Do you think it's appropriate for an IRGC card-carrying member to attend this meeting?
Well, the thing is that I'm sure there's governance rule for meetings. We've been very clear about the IRGC and its destabilizing influence, and that's why we have taken sanctions across the board when it comes to IRGC members and, of course, the IRGC organization as a whole. Thank you so much.
Please, I have a question.
Dear all, good afternoon. Please allow me to give the floor to Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia, Tanja Fajon. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's my honor to be today here. It's my first time to attend in the name of Slovenia as a member of Security Council this circle, especially on a very timely and important and urgent debate on the situation in Middle East. As regards the war in Gaza, if I may say so, we are extremely worried. The humanitarian, the dire crisis situation we are facing from day to day. Around 26,000 civilians, innocent civilians, 2/3 of women and children. From 7th of October, 1 Palestinian out of 100, it's unbearable high death toll. This has to stop. My message today is very clear. We need immediate ceasefire. We need it now. Enough is enough. Slovenia will continue all efforts to bring to peace in the region, and what is necessary urgently is to provide humanitarian assistance to people in need. There is starvation, there is lack of medicines, people are dying, and the situation is catastrophic from day to day. So immediate ceasefire now, this is crucial. Humanitarian aid to innocent civilians, release of hostages now, and a serious talk on a political solution. That means serious talk on a two-state solution, the only guarantee for the security of Israelis and Palestinians is a Palestinian state. The time is running out, the confidence is lacking. For that reason, international community has an amazing responsibility. It's our collective test on humanity, and the world has failed so far on humanity. So we have to act, and we have to act urgently. And I do expect that today's debate will be sincere, frank, and focused on the protection of life of innocent civilians on all sides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Many of the European countries like England, Germany, France, and others, and the US talked about the right of Israel to defend itself. Don't you see that it was like a green light to give Israel the right to go into this genocidal war against Palestinians? Thank you.
Military solution is never an answer. The war is never an answer. We just see an unbearable rise, the number of death toll. We need a political solution. We have to speak loud, and we have to require ceasefire. It is not only for humanitarian aid that is necessary, and I speak in the name of Slovenia. We'll support every effort that brings peace in the region. And for that reason, I do hope that international community is mature and responsible in that regard. Security Council has a very important role to play. It's about peace and security in the world, and that has to be our message, no matter who, but in the name of Slovenia, protection of civilians, innocent children and women is our collective responsibility, is our test of humanity.
Thank you. Margaret Bashir with the Voice of America. Welcome to the Security Council. You may be called upon this year as a member of the Council to vote on full membership for Palestine. Is that something that Slovenia would consider supporting?
You said we may be, so once we'll have to decide, we'll decide collectively. So I cannot prejudge now, but I can say that the dialogue with all partners in the region is extremely important. And as I have a chance to speak with many ministers in the Middle East, including yesterday in Brussels with a minister from Israel and from Palestine, from Saudi, from Jordan, it's important that every solution that it comes engages, in the first place, people from the Arab world, but also Israelis. There is no other way to guarantee security for Israelis and Palestinians living side by side.
Talal Haj from Al Arabiya Network. Your position is not, it's a common position within the overall majority of the United Nations members. However, how do you feel the frustrations you must have when you listen to comments and statements by prominent Israeli leaders, from the Prime Minister to the War Cabinet, concerning the two-state solutions, concerning the length they intend to go on with the war in Gaza? The latest is 6 months. Before that it was a year or 2 years. How are we going to convince them that the best way is to put an end to the killing and the bombing and achieve a real ceasefire in Gaza towards and move towards a two-state solution?
In diplomacy, there is no place for frustration. We have to be active, we have to be engaged, And as I said before, we have a collective responsibility. At the end, for the lives of people. And every day, as long as these wars go on, you see more and more frustration on both sides. You see people angry, you see people dying, you see frustration and lack of confidence. That is why also the window of opportunity might be narrowing down. That is why I said at the beginning, we need ceasefire now, and we need conditions to start working seriously and concretely for a peace plan, peace conference that we support, that brings everyone together, and serious talks on a two-state solution and a recognition of Palestinian state. It's not much time, but we have to act now. Thank you.
Hello, Espen Barth Eide, I'm the Norwegian Foreign Minister. We have been involved in the quest for a final peace settlement in the Middle East for more than 30 years. We are now 31 years into the Oslo process that started in 1993. And we are here to say that, like my Slovenian colleague, we need an immediate ceasefire. We need a rapid upscaling of humanitarian efforts. We have an appalling, tragic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and we are also, of course, also increasingly worried about developments in the West Bank and beyond, the risk for a regional escalation. So these issues are paramount and immediate, but they are not solutions. The solution requires a political process. And it requires a political process that leads us to Palestinian statehood, not any Palestinian statehood, but a Palestinian state that covers the territory of the West Bank and Gaza, that is run by the Palestinian authorities, by the Palestinian institutions that have been built under the Oslo process, and a solution in which there can be guarantees for security and prosperity of the Israelis and the Palestinians alike. So we need a solution that both sides can believe in. We need to get back on track to that solution, and the only positive small ray of hope in this tragic situation that we now envisage is that there is broader international support for a two-state solution and a process towards that than in the very long run. You know, we see it from the United States of America, we see it from the very interesting Arab ministers' plan that is being developed right now, and I spoke to many of them here. We see it in the European Union. Norway has always been a supporter of this, and we think that we really need both to deal with the immediate, but also the more long-term, to find a settlement in which we will come out of this eternal spiral of violence.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Yes. What is the position of Norway on the trial going on in The Hague that accuses Israel of genocide? Does Norway think that this helps or doesn't help what's going on at the moment?
So there is a big discussion globally, internationally, about what is actually happening in Gaza. And I said when I heard about this that I was glad that Israel decided to turn up and defend themselves, and we now actually have a conversation at the highest body of international law, at the International Court, ICJ, in Hague. And of course, their decision matters. These are questions that are best dealt with by a court. And now it is in the court, and we follow that with great interest. And of course, as you know, I'm sure you know, the court might decide to take some intermediate steps if it sees that there's a note merit. But I'm not going to pronounce myself on what I think the court should decide, because that is a question for the court. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi, that is in London. Sir, yes, you just said 30 years since Oslo, and the vision of the two-state solution was embedded in that agreement. But Israel, since day one, they were sabotaging the two-state solution by building settlement, expanding settlement. I don't know if you went to the West Bank. I know the area very well. And there is no room for the second state, independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, unless you dismantle all these settlements. Would that be possible? Is this two-state solution a real viable, possible solution now?
You're absolutely right. I have been many times to Israel, to the West Bank, also to Gaza. I've seen this. Of course, we think the occupation is illegal, and we think the settlements on occupied land should not have happened. They have happened. It has to be part of a comprehensive settlement, because a proper Palestinian state also need an area on which to be a state. The details of this have to be negotiated, just like the other outstanding issues, status of Jerusalem, the exact border, security arrangements, and the status of refugees. But my point is that we need to get back on track to a serious discussion. And I think that in order to achieve the short-term needs, we also need to recreate a vision of a political horizon in the long run. And I know it's very difficult, but I think the alternatives are even more difficult compared to a two-state solution. One last question? No? Okay, thank you.
Vous avez devant vous la liste des orateurs et oratrices ayant demandé à participer. Établi en la matière, je propose qu'ils soient invités à participer à la présente séance. Est-ce qu'il y a des objections? Je considère que non. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. Je donne maintenant la parole au secrétaire général, son Excellence M. Antonio Gutiérrez. Vous avez la parole, Monsieur le secrétaire général.
Mr. President, Excellencies, over 100 days have passed since more than 1,200 Israelis and others were killed in the horrific terror attacks launched by Hamas against Israel, with over 250 people taken hostage. For all those affected, these have been 100 days of heartache and anguish. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, kidnapping of civilians, the use of sexual violence against them, or the indiscriminate launching of rockets towards civilian targets. I once again demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. In the interim, they must be treated humanely and allowed to receive visits and assistance from the Red Cross. Last week in Davos, I had another moving meeting with families of hostages, and in this case, even some former hostages themselves. Since the beginning, I have maintained close contact with Qatari and Egyptian authorities on the efforts for their release. And yesterday, I received from the Israeli mission a list of many of the remaining hostages. It was also reported yesterday that Israel is proposing a 2-month pause in hostilities in exchange for a phased release of all remaining hostages. I will continue in my limited capacity to pursue all efforts to contribute to their release. Excellencies, the past 100 days have been heartbreaking and catastrophic for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. More than 25,000 people, mainly women and children, have reportedly been killed in operations launched by Israeli forces, and more than 60,000 others have been reportedly injured. In recent days, the military offensive has intensified in Khan Yunis, with many additional casualties. The entire population of Gaza is enduring destruction at a scale and speed without parallel in recent history. Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Excellencies, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is appalling. With winter bearing down, 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza face inhumane, squalid conditions, struggling to simply make it through another day without proper shelter, heating, sanitary facilities, food, and drinking water. Everyone in Gaza is hungry, with a quarter of Gaza's population, more than 500,000 people, grappling with catastrophic levels of food insecurity. Meanwhile, nearly 1.5 million people are now crammed inside Rafah governorate. Disease is spreading as the health system collapses. Only 16 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are even partly functional. That means the people of Gaza not only risk being killed or injured by relentless bombardments, they also run a growing chance of contracting infectious diseases like hepatitis I, dysentery, cholera. Without functioning hospitals and with minimal opportunities for patients to exit Gaza, thousands suffering from chronic diseases like cancer and kidney failure are at risk of dying. A functioning medical evacuation system is urgently needed. Excellencies, in the face of colossal human suffering and enormous obstacles, our United Nations humanitarian operations are striving to deliver. Tragically, 153 of our colleagues have been killed, a source of bottomless grief for us all. At the same time, the women and men of the United Nations, alongside our partners in Gaza, are working heroically every day to reach people in need. Many have lost loved ones and left behind shattered homes. They have been distributing ready-to-eat meals and other food items to shelters. They are supporting the very few bakeries that are still functioning. They are delivering medicines, medical supplies, bottled water and tracked water, hygiene kits and cleaning kits, tents, tarpaulin sheets and blankets, but in quantities that are far from enough. In the south, food distributions are helping to bring down prices, and 250,000 Palestinians in Gaza were able to buy bread at a subsidized price. I welcome the agreement facilitated by Qatar and France of an operation to deliver additional medicines and healthcare supplies to civilians in Gaza and to hostages held in Gaza. They also welcome Israel's announcement that it will allow a United Nations assessment mission to the north, but that mission is on hold because of renewed fighting. Under Secretary General Sigrid Kaag started her work as Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza on 8 January, in line with Security Council Resolution 2720. She visited Gaza today and will update you next week on our overall efforts. I ask all parties to the conflict to cooperate with her as demanded by the Security Council. Excellencies, let's face it, despite all the efforts I described, no effective humanitarian aid operation can function under the conditions that have been forced on Palestinians in Gaza and those doing everything possible to help them. The quantity of aid is highly insufficient in light of needs. It is fantasy to think that 2.2 million people can survive on aid alone. Basic commodities from the private sector must enter in meaningful quantities, as they did for many years before the current fighting. This is essential to address rising needs and avert both a complete breakdown and ever-mounting death toll. For our part, we are determined to do much more to scale up the distribution of food items, tents and shelter materials, medicines, clean water and spare parts to repair critical sanitation infrastructure. Excellencies, humanitarian delivery is not an exercise of counting trucks. It is about ensuring the right volume and quality of assistance reaches people in need in line with Security Council Resolution 2720. But to be able to do our work, a set of operational requirements must be met. We need safety. We are operating in a war zone. The current humanitarian notification mechanisms do not offer any real confidence for operations and planning humanitarian responses. A number of serious incidents have shown how these essential mechanisms need to be substantially improved. Safety also entails reliable and cleared roads inside Gaza and unimpeded crossings and checkpoints. We need to be equipped to do our job. This includes telecommunications equipment, so convoys can communicate with each other, armored vehicles and protective gear, given the ongoing hostilities and widespread contamination with explosives remnants of war, far greater logistical capacity, spare parts for infrastructure such as desalination plants and other critical humanitarian items. We are grateful to Member States for their funding support. We are finally seeing a few signs of progress in the authorization of entry permits for certain goods and some measures to reduce screening and crossing times. But we still face a cumbersome process of verifications and multiple unjustified rejections of desperately needed items. We need more crossing points into Gaza to reduce congestion and avoid checkpoints. The provision of aid to Gaza via the Ashdod port in Israel must also resume. A first shipment of flour reached Gaza from Ashdod, but much more is required. We need access to the north. In the first 2 weeks of January, out of 29 planned humanitarian missions to deliver life-saving supplies north of Wadi Gaza, only 7 were accomplished fully or partially. The majority of missions were denied access by Israel. After over 100 days of operations in the north, insecurity and fighting has continued. And we need visas. Dozens of humanitarians have been waiting for months to receive their visas from the government of Israel. I call for rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded and sustained humanitarian access throughout Gaza. And I repeat my call for an end to all violations of international humanitarian law. The use of human shields is unacceptable, as are the unprecedented levels of devastation and civilian killings. I am also deeply troubled by reports of Israel's inhumane treatment of Palestinians detained during military operations. Excellencies, I renew my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This will ensure sufficient aid gets to where it is needed, facilitate the release of hostages, and help lower the tensions around the Middle East. War and misery in Gaza are fueling turmoil far beyond. We are seeing dangerous developments across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where tensions are off the charts, with a dramatic increase in casualties. Dozens of Palestinians are being arrested daily. Over 6,000 Palestinians were detained since 7th October, with many subsequently released. And settler violence is also another major concern. The demolition and seizure of Palestinian-owned houses and other structures continues, and the Palestinian economy is in crisis. Israel's withholding of a significant portion of Palestinian tax revenues, the continued prohibition of nearly all Palestinian workers entering Israel since 7th October, and severe movement and access restrictions across the West Bank are all contributing to soaring unemployment and poverty. I hope that ongoing negotiations will allow for the full payment of employees of the Palestinian Authority. Excellencies, the risks of broader regional escalation are now becoming a reality. Turning to the north, daily exchanges of fire across the Blue Line, including strikes on civilian areas, have killed 6 Israelis and 25 Lebanese civilians and driven tens of thousands from their homes on both sides. The risk of miscalculation is dangerously high. I urge all parties to refrain from aggressive rhetoric and to immediately end activities that could further inflame tensions. My special coordinators and I continue our extensive outreach to all key stakeholders to reduce regional tensions, and I welcome the efforts of the United States and several European and Arab governments for a negotiated de-escalation. The situation in the Red Sea is also deeply worrying. Houthi attacks are disrupting global trade. These have been followed by airstrikes by the United States and the United Kingdom on Houthi positions in Yemen. De-escalation is essential, and all attacks on merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea must cease immediately. Meanwhile, there are almost daily attacks on facilities hosting US and international coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. In response, the United States has launched airstrikes targeting individuals and groups suspected of these actions. And in Syria, airstrikes that Iran and Syria have attributed to Israel have targeted officials of Hamas and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. I urge all parties to step back from the brink and to consider the horrendous human cost of a regional conflict. Beyond the need for immediate de-escalation, each situation demands the implementation of a clear political roadmap that would contribute to long-term regional stability. In Syria, that is the UN-facilitated political solution in line with Security Council Resolution 2254 that meets the needs of all Syrians. Along the Blue Line, we need full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. And the Yemen, the establishment of a UN roadmap to implement the commitments made by the parties and prepare for a Yemeni-owned inclusive political process under UN auspices. Excellencies, a lasting end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only come through a two-state solution. Israelis must see their legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see their legitimate aspirations for a fully independent, viable, and sovereign state realized in line with United Nations resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. Israel's occupation must end. Excellencies, last week's clear and repeated rejection of the two-state solution at the highest level of the Israeli government is unacceptable. And this was despite the strongest appeals from even the friends of Israel, including those sitting around this table. This refusal and the denial of the right to statehood to the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security. It would exacerbate polarization and embolden extremists everywhere. The right of the Palestinian people to build their own fully independent state must be recognized by all, and any refusal to accept the two-state solution by any party must be firmly rejected. What is the alternative? How would a one-state solution look with such a large number of Palestinians inside without any real sense of freedom, rights, and dignity? This would be inconceivable. The two-state solution is the only way to address the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. Monsieur le Président, Excellences, le rôle de la communauté internationale est clair. Nous devons nous unir pour soutenir les Israéliens et les Palestiniens afin qu'ils prennent des mesures fortes en faveur d'un véritable processus de paix. Au cours des 2 dernières décennies, la solution à 2 États a été critiquée, dénigrée et laissée pour morte à maintes reprises. Cependant, elle reste le seul moyen de parvenir à une paix durable et équitable en Israël, en Palestine et dans la région tout entière. Comme nous l'avons tragiquement vu au cours des 3 derniers mois, c'est aussi la seule voie pour sortir des cycles sans fin de peur, de haine et de violence. Cette période terrible pour les Israéliens et les Palestiniens doit inciter les parties au conflit ainsi que la communauté internationale à agir avec courage et détermination pour parvenir à une paix juste et durable. Et je vous remercie.
Je remercie le secrétaire général de sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole à son Excellence Mohamed Riyad Al-Malaki, le ministre des Affaires étrangères et des expatriés de l'État observateur de Palestine. Vous avez la parole, Monsieur le ministre.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to thank France and you, Mr. Minister, for convening the Security Council at ministerial level as we meet once again in the shadows of the deadly Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people, which continues unabated, taking thousands of innocent civilian lives, destroying everything in its path, and threatening regional and international peace and security. Allow me also to thank the Secretary General for his briefing, but more importantly, for his relentless efforts in pursuit of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the protection of civilians, and the provision of desperately needed humanitarian assistance. Under his leadership, the United Nations agencies on the ground have persisted in their valiant efforts to perform their sacred mission in the most impossible of circumstances. These circumstances are impossible by design. They are not the result of a natural disaster or a regrettable consequence of the war, but rather a premeditated effort to inflict maximum pain on the Palestinian population by combining 3 factors. 1, the most savage and indiscriminate bombing campaign in the post-World War II era. 2, massive destruction and cruel siege, depriving the population of the essentials for its survival, leading to the spread of famine, dehydration, disease, destitution, and despair. 3, forcible displacement at a scale and speed not witnessed in modern history, with virtually the entire Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, 70% of whom are refugees from the 1948 Nakba, displaced often multiple times in desperate search of safety anywhere, yet faced with death and devastation everywhere. No home, hospital, school, mosque, church, or UNRWA shelter is safe from Israel's bombardment. 2,000-ton bombs dropped with no care whatsoever for civilian lives, more than 25,000 of whom have been killed, including over 11,000 children, more than 63,000 injured, thousands permanently maimed and disabled, and more than 7,000 buried under the rubble. Dozens more will be killed in the hours that this council meets, and thousands more as the council continues being prevented from calling for an immediate ceasefire. This is an assault. This is an assault of atrocities, atrocities that shock and shame the human conscience. In making this determination, the faith of the perpetrators is irrelevant. The faith of the victims is irrelevant. What matters only are the countless innocent lives destroyed and the valiant shattering of the laws enacted post-World War II to preserve humanity. Mr. President, from Kampala, where the global South was gathered, to Brussels, where Arab ministers met their European counterparts, to the United Nations in New York, the world is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. A ceasefire is indispensable to achieve what the Security Council has called for: protection of civilians, safe and unhindered humanitarian access and humanitarian assistance at scale throughout the Gaza Strip, release of those held captive, rejection of forced displacement, and the achievement of peace consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, on one side, there is the will of the international community, and on the other side, the whims of an Israeli prime minister driven by a single goal: his own political survival, at the expense of the survival of millions of Palestinians under Israel's illegal occupation and peace and security for all. There is a dividing line between those who want peace and those who are determined to prevent it. The latter believe there is a people too many in our region, while the former believe there is an independent state too long denied its rightful place among the community of nations and its people denied their inalienable right to self-determination. For the leaders at the helm in Israel, the Palestinian people are a people too many. They deny their existence, their rights, their humanity, whether in Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, or the Palestinian refugees or the Palestinian prisoners. They do not see our people as an empirical and political reality to coexist with, but as a demographic threat to get rid of through death, displacement, or subjugation. These are the choices they offer us: genocide, ethnic cleansing, or apartheid. I know some here are uncomfortable with these words, but they are the reality that we live under. And trust me, you should be much more concerned with the existence of that reality than the words used to describe it. Mr. President, there are only two paths ahead. One that starts with Palestinian freedom and leads to shared peace and security in our region, or one that continues denying this freedom and dooms our region to further bloodshed and endless conflict. The Arab world has been unequivocal in choosing the first path, the one that enjoys support by the international community as a whole. Meanwhile, Netanyahu boasts publicly and repeatedly that he played a key role in preventing the independence of the Palestinian state and peace in our region, and pledges to continue doing so. Israel should no longer entertain the illusion that there is somehow a third path whereby it can choose continued occupation and colonialism and apartheid and somehow still achieve regional peace and security. This is not a viable path, nor a legitimate path. Our people are not less deserving of freedom, security, and peace. Our children's lives are not less sacred. Our cause is just, and resilience, and the resilience and steadfastness of our people, their sumud, is epic and worthy of the international solidarity they have received from across the globe. But as Mahmoud Darwish has said, their hope is for a normal life, where they are neither heroes nor victims, a life where they are able to live, to thrive, to see their children grow, see them be and come whatever they wish to be. They should not have to fight every day for their survival, for their most basic and most fundamental rights, for their simple dream to live in freedom and dignity on their ancestor land. The Nakba should not be prolonged any further, nor repeated time and time again. It must come to an immediate end. It is time for international law and UN resolutions to be respected fully and for non-compliance to be penalized. It is time for accountability. Justice is paramount. It is the foundation of any sustainable peace. Attempts to frame the pursuit of justice as somehow contradictory to peace must cease. It is time to convene an international peace conference with a clear objective: upholding international law and implementing UN resolutions through resolute action by all states, organizations, and the UN. It is time for recognizing the admission of the State of Palestine to the UN. We were not granted a veto right over Israel's admission to the United Nations 75 years ago. Israel does not have a veto right over the admission of the State of Palestine 75 years later. The international consensus on two states in this land must be upheld in word and deed. There can be no more pretext for endless delay and obstruction. The disregard for Palestinian life, for international law, for the regional and international will to bring about just and lasting peace should no longer be tolerated. We are running out of time. There are two choices: spreading fire or a ceasefire. The alternative to freedom, justice, and peace is what is happening now. We must make sure it stops now, and we must make sure it never happens again. Never again. Thank you.
Je remercie son Excellence, Monsieur Al-Maliki, de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant d'Israël. Vous avez la parole.
President. Mr. President, at the outset, I wish to thank France and to congratulate you on your recent appointment and wish you the best in your crucial position. Today, you have a historic opportunity to shift the focus of this Council to the real and grave security threats. The Middle East is suffering from a cancer, and up until today, the Security Council has only ever discussed providing aspirin. Cancer, Mr. President, is not treated with aspirin. The time has come for this Council to address and eliminate the root of this cancer, and not only its side effects. Distinguished Council members and colleagues, we live in a backwards world. 18 years ago, Israel fully withdrew from Gaza in hopes to build trust with the Palestinians and chart a path towards a joint future. Instead, the Palestinians voted in the Hamas terror organization, and since then, under the UN's nose and its agencies, Hamas has exploited international aid and turned Gaza into the war machine that it is. Hamas dug hundreds of miles of terror tunnels and manufactured tens of thousands of rockets. Hamas did not hide its genocidal goals of annihilating Israel. The world knew this, the UN knew this. On October 7th, Hamas's agenda of Jewish genocide became a reality. My people were deliberately butchered. 1,200 murdered in a single day. 240 children, men, women, and the elderly taken hostage. This act of sheer evil was proportionally 20 times bigger than 9/11, 20 times. And Hamas leadership have publicly sworn to commit such massacre again and again and again until Israel is destroyed. Yet, shockingly, many here on the Security Council are advocating for a permanent ceasefire, while giving no thought to the implications. What do you think will happen if there is a ceasefire? I will tell you what will happen. Hamas will remain in power, they will regroup and rearm, and soon Israelis will face another attempted Holocaust. Is this the outcome you seek for all of us? That once again Israel will be forced to carry out another defensive operation in Gaza? Do you truly expect us to leave our hostages in Hamas terror tunnels? As long as Hamas remains in power, a very dark future is inevitable for all of us. How can you call for a ceasefire and mention a solution to the conflict at the same time? This is a complete oxymoron. You cannot have both. It's impossible. Hamas seeks to annihilate Israel, and if you support a position that will leave Hamas in power, you cannot pretend to wish for a solution to the conflict. The past 18 years have proven this. But dear friends, there is a formula that can end the bloodshed, and if the Council stands united behind it, then it will materialize. Should Hamas turn in those responsible for October 7th, and should Hamas release all the hostages, this war would be over immediately. This is not a war that Israel chose, but we will defend our future just as each of you would defend the future of your country. Colleagues, today's meeting demonstrates the pinnacle of the UN's absurdity. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are vile terrorists, but these forces of terror are a mere symptom of the true security threat in the region and beyond. There is a regime responsible for sponsoring 90% of Hamas's terror budget, as well as arming them and training them. This is the same regime that supplies Hezbollah with precision missiles and provides the Houthis with ballistic missiles. And all this is carried out in order to wreak havoc and instability in the Middle East. And soon, these acts of terror will be carried out under a nuclear umbrella. Yet, the Council basically ignores this enormous threat, the threat that is the Ayatollah regime of Iran. How absurd is it that the foreign minister of the #1 state sponsor of terrorism that aspires to destabilize the Middle East is here today to address the Council? Can you imagine Hitler's foreign minister participating in a serious discussion on how to defend the Jews during the Holocaust? This is an upside-down world. The representative of a regime that publicly calls for the annihilation of the State of Israel publicly is advising on how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a truly upside-down world. Colleagues, we hear calls to avoid a spillover of the conflict. I want to clarify. This spillover is not happening magically. It was planned and instructed. The person directly responsible for the terror attacks throughout the region for this spillover since October 7th will be sitting here soon. Minister Abdelhayan represents the regime that arms and instructs Hezbollah to target our civilians. He represents the regime that transfers weapons and intelligence to the Houthis. Without Iran, the Houthis would not have advanced cruise missiles or UAVs to target merchant vessels in the Red Sea. Look at this picture. These are Iranian weapons that were seized by the US Navy on their way to the Houthis. This is clear proof of who is masterminding this so-called spillover. Mr. Secretary General, has Iran's foreign minister come here to be held accountable? We all know the answer. Iran always stands in the shadows and pulls the strings. They always claim deniability, but the evidence is right here, just like in many other cases. Will the Council finally address the real threat to regional security? Mr. President, every country in the region has been affected by Iran's tentacles of terror. Saudi Arabia has been attacked with Iranian-supplied UAVs and ballistic missiles. The United Arab Emirates suffered several drone and missile attacks on its soil, including a strike on the Abu Dhabi airport. And recent Iranian strikes in Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan are further proof that Iran will stop at nothing to expand its Shiite hegemony. In Lebanon, just as in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, Iran is the architect of instability. Even the people of Iran themselves suffer daily, and you know it. The Iranian regime murders women, murders innocent protesters, and just yesterday, another innocent Iranian, Muhammad Qubadlu, was executed. And while innocent Iranians swing from the gallows, Minister Abdelhayan will sit here and lecture us on the sanctity of human life. Iran is even responsible for arming and training the Polisario Front to carry out terror attacks in Morocco. And its hegemonic ambitions can be felt in Sudan, Mali, and Niger as well. But Iran's terror doesn't end only in the Middle East or Africa. Albania was hit with an Iranian cyber attack. And as we all know, Iranian drones are being used by Russia to kill civilians in Ukraine. Iran's terror will reach all of you. We all know this, even Russia, who collaborates with Iran. If the Council continues to focus only on providing aid to Gaza, which is truly important, it is important to provide aid to Gaza, but ignores the root of the dire threat to the Middle East and the world, the Iranian threat, then, Mr. President, our collective future will be a very dark, radical Shiite future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant d'Israël de sa déclaration. Je vais maintenant faire une déclaration en ma qualité de ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères de la France. Monsieur le secrétaire général, mesdames et messieurs les ministres, mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs en vos grades et qualités, j'ai pris l'initiative de tenir ce débat du Conseil de sécurité au niveau ministériel sous notre présidence. Je remercie le secrétaire général de son discours fort et souhaiterais à titre national revenir également sur la situation tragique à Gaza, sur le risque d'embrasement dans la région, car ce risque est réel. Face à ce qui se joue entre Israéliens et Palestiniens, deux chemins sont possibles pour ce Conseil. Il y a d'une part le choix de ceux qui font le choix de la division, de la polémique, de la surenchère, le choix de souffler sur les braises, le choix de ceux qui envahissent leurs voisins, bafouent sa souveraineté en Ukraine comme au Moyen-Orient et cherchent ici la division plutôt que l'unité. Je ferai pour ma part un autre choix en disant deux choses. Nous pouvons, nous devons être solidaires à la fois des Israéliens et des Palestiniens. Nous pouvons, nous devons dire à chacun les choses difficiles. La France agit au nom du bien des peuples, au nom de la paix. Elle est amie d'Israël, comme elle est amie du peuple palestinien. Ainsi, je dois dire à Israël, qui connaît l'amitié du peuple français, qu'il faut un État palestinien, que les violences envers le peuple palestinien, notamment celles des colons extrémistes, doivent cesser et que le droit international s'impose à tous. Je dois dire aux représentants palestiniens qui connaissent l'engagement historique de la France en faveur d'un État palestinien que nous continuerons à lutter contre le terrorisme avec fermeté et détermination, qu'il ne peut y avoir d'ambiguïté sur le droit d'Israël à vivre en paix et en sécurité et à exercer son droit à la légitime défense face au terrorisme. C'est en ami que la France dit aux deux parties que le chemin sera difficile pour tous. Pour tous. Trois principes guideront l'action de la France au sein de son Conseil dans les jours et les semaines qui viennent. Je veux les énoncer ici. D'abord, le principe d'humanité. Tous les otages doivent être libérés immédiatement et sans condition. C'est un besoin impérieux. Nous avons cessé de le demander. Ce Conseil aussi l'a demandé de manière très claire. Au nom de ce principe d'humanité, nous devons condamner sans équivoque et sans tarder davantage les attaques terroristes du 7 octobre, des attaques massives, barbares, abominables, des attaques commises par des terroristes. Notre Conseil doit aussi ouvrir les yeux sur les violences sexuelles que ces terroristes ont utilisées comme arme de guerre. Au nom de ce principe d'humanité encore, nous devons agir en faveur de la population civile à Gaza et d'œuvrer à un cessez-le-feu. Les souffrances qu'elle subit sont épouvantables. La France fait partie de ceux qui, au sein de ce Conseil, agissent. Le président de la République, Emmanuel Macron, a pris l'initiative d'une conférence internationale humanitaire. 1 milliard d'euros d'aide humanitaire aux civils de Gaza y ont été annoncés. Je passe à nouveau un appel aujourd'hui à l'ensemble des partenaires internationaux. Restons mobilisés. La France est désormais un des principaux soutiens des civils de Gaza, notamment parce que nous avons augmenté massivement notre contribution française à l'UNRWA. Sur les 100 millions d'aides humanitaires annoncées pour Gaza par la France en novembre, plus de la moitié passera par cette agence, Monsieur le Secrétaire général. En 2024, nous appuierons encore davantage les Palestiniens en mobilisant 100 millions d'euros supplémentaires. Nos actions sont également concrètes dans la région. 1 000 tonnes de fret transitant par l'Égypte, avec 1 000 actes médicaux pratiqués en pleine coopération avec l'Égypte à bord du Dixmude, et du fret humanitaire parachuté sur Gaza à l'aide de la Jordanie notamment. Ce Conseil, dans ses 2 résolutions humanitaires, a posé des exigences. Elles doivent être respectées. Entendons les souffrances des femmes et des hommes et des enfants de Gaza, entendons le sentiment d'impuissance des acteurs humanitaires, les civils, les infrastructures civiles, les hôpitaux, les écoles doivent être protégés. Les travailleurs humanitaires de l'ONU, du CICR et autres organisations de terrain doivent eux aussi être protégés. Je veux saluer leur courage, leur engagement, leur dévouement. Je veux leur dire que la France continuera à les soutenir sans relâche ni renoncement. Je veux leur dire également qu'ils doivent pouvoir emprunter tous les points de passage nécessaires et acheminer les cargaisons vitales jusqu'au nord de la bande de Gaza, au-delà de Wadi Gaza. Il nous faut œuvrer immédiatement à un cessez-le-feu durable qui seul mettra fin à ces souffrances. Mesdames et messieurs, le deuxième principe qui guide l'action de la France est celui de justice. Cette guerre et ces atroces souffrances nous obligent et obligent ce Conseil. Nous avons le devoir de déployer tous les efforts possibles en vue d'une solution politique au conflit israélo-palestinien. Pour y parvenir, il faut une relance du processus de paix et cette relance doit être décisive et crédible. Nous connaissons les paramètres de la solution. 2 États vivant côte à côte, en paix et en sécurité, dans des frontières sûres et reconnues sur la base des lignes de 1967 et ayant l'un et l'autre pour capitale Jérusalem. C'est le cadre fixé par le droit international, c'est aussi la position constante de la France et c'est la raison pour laquelle il ne revient pas ni à Israël ni à quiconque de décider pour les Palestiniens comment ils seront demain gouvernés, ni l'étendue de leur souveraineté. Dans le cadre de cette résolution à 2 États, il faut aussi penser dès à présent au futur de Gaza. Comme je le disais, il ne revient pas à Israël de décider du sort des populations palestiniennes de Gaza. Gaza est une terre palestinienne et il revient à l'autorité palestinienne que nous soutenons de pouvoir y exercer sa pleine autorité. Pour que cela devienne une réalité, les Nations Unies ont et auront un rôle important à jouer. À cet égard, je veux également, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, féliciter Sigrid Kaag pour sa nomination comme coordinatrice pour l'action humanitaire de la reconstruction de Gaza. Toute la communauté internationale devra se mobiliser pour reconstruire Gaza. La situation en Cisjordanie requiert toute notre attention. Les violences perpétrées par les colons violents contre la population civile palestinienne sont aujourd'hui inacceptables. À nouveau, nous condamnons avec la plus grande fermeté. Elles doivent cesser immédiatement. Avec ses partenaires, la France prendra le moment venu des initiatives pour que ce Conseil se saisisse de l'ensemble de ces questions politiques. Enfin, le troisième principe que notre action sera le principe de responsabilité face au risque d'escalade. Nous devons tout faire pour éviter un embrasement de la région et une extension du conflit. Certains sont tentés d'utiliser les groupes qui leur sont inféodés pour ajouter au chaos et porter atteinte à la stabilité de la région. Nous leur adressons un avertissement. Nous sommes notamment gravement préoccupés par la montée des tensions autour de la ligne bleue. Nous appelons les parties à une stricte retenue et à tout mettre en œuvre pour mettre un terme définitif à l'escalade. Il faut permettre à la FINUL d'exercer son mandat dans de bonnes conditions. Nous sommes également préoccupés par les attaques commises par les Houthis en mer Rouge. Ce sont des atteintes extrêmement graves au droit du commerce international. La France continuera d'assumer ses responsabilités. Nous condamnons de la même manière les violations à la souveraineté de l'Irak. Mesdames et messieurs, la France restera à l'œuvre et à l'initiative pour que notre Conseil s'exprime sur tous les volets de la crise, pour qu'il condamne enfin les attaques barbares du 7 octobre, pour que le droit international humanitaire soit respecté et réponde aux besoins des populations civiles de Gaza, pour faire avancer enfin de manière décisive la résolution et la solution à deux États. Vous pouvez compter sur notre engagement. Je vous remercie. Je reprends donc mes fonctions de président du Conseil. Je donne la parole à son Excellence Monsieur Ahmed Attaf, ministre des Affaires étrangères et de la communauté nationale à l'étranger de l'Algérie. Vous avez la parole.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شكرا سيد الرئيس. لم أجد أنسب وأليق وأجدر ما أستهل به مساهمتي هذه في نقاش مجلسنا لهذا اليوم من تبليغ رسالة لرئيس الجمهورية السيد عبد المجيد تبون، رسالة وضعها أمانة بين يدي، وهي رسالة تقدير وامتنان للأمين العام السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش ولكافة هيئات منظومة الأمم المتحدة على ما بادروا به ولا يزالون من أجل تخفيف المآسي التي تطال غزة وتضميد جروحها وإيقاف نزيفها. وذات الرسالة رسالة دعم وتقدير لهم نظير جهودهم الحثيثة رغم ما يتعرضون له من طعن في مصداقيتهم ومساس بسلطتهم ومن استفزازات وابتزازات من لدن احتلال لا يرى لجبروته ولطغيانه حدودا. للسيد الأمين العام كل التشجيع والاحترام منا، وكلنا خشوع وإجلال وإكبار أمام أرواح من خدموا الإنسانية تحت راية الأمم المتحدة وسقطوا في غزة دفاعاً عن أسمى قيمها وأرقى مثلها. وذات الرسالة رسالة ترحم على أرواح من ارتقوا شهداء من أجل وطن وقضية، وطن لهم وقضية لهم ولنا. إن العدوان على غزة وشيك الدخول في شهره الخامس وآفاق حمل الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للعدول عنه لا تزال مسدودة. إن وضعا كهذا يفرض فرضا على البشرية المجتمعة في بيتها هذا ثلاثة تحديات رئيسية. التحدي الأول وهو تحدي ضمان احترام القرارات والقوانين والتشريعات التي تصدر باسمها، وعدم السماح أو التسامح مع الخروقات الجسيمة لكل ما أقرته لضمان تعايش سلمي وحضاري ومتمدن بين أعضائها. التحدي الثاني وهو تحدي عدم القبول بأن ينصب عضو من أعضائها نفسه فوق الجميع ويستفيد من معاملات تبدو وكأنها وضعت لصالحه دون سواه في شكل استثناءات وانتقاءات وامتيازات وحصانات غير مبررة وغير مقبولة. والتحدي الثالث وهو تحدي إخضاع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الاستيطاني للضوابط القانونية الدولية ووضع حد لما يجمع الكثير على تسميته باللا مساءلة واللا محاسبة واللا معاقبة، والتي حان الأوان لوضع حد صارم وحاسم لها. ومن هذا المنظور ترحب الجزائر وتثمن تثمينا عاليا بوادر الابتعاد عن هذه المعاملات التفضيلية من خلال مبادرات راقية وشجاعة وجريئة لإجبار الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على تحمل مسؤولياته. وأعني تحديداً مبادرة الرئيس عبد المجيد تبون بحشد الخبراء القانونيين والتنظيمات الحقوقية العالمية لمقاضاة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أمام الهيئات الدولية لإنهاء عقود من إفلات هذا الأخير من المساءلة والمحاسبة والمعاقبة. وأعني مبادرة جمهورية جنوب إفريقيا برفع دعوى ضد الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أمام محكمة العدل الدولية بتهمة شن حرب إبادة على غزة. وأعني مبادرة كل من جمهورية الشيلي والمكسيك بإخطار المحكمة الجنائية الدولية بالجرائم متعددة الأشكال والأنواع التي صاحبت ولا تزال العدوان الإسرائيلي على قطاع غزة. كل هذه المبادرات تستدعي منا السند والثناء والتشجيع لأنها تمثل خطوات صائبة على درب الصواب. وبقدر ما نحث هذه الهيئات القضائية الدولية على الاطلاع بمسؤولياتها وواجباتها القانونية كاملة، فإننا نشدد بقدر أكبر على إلزامية الاطلاع بالمسؤوليات السياسية والأمنية التي تقع على عاتق مجلس الأمن بصفته الهيئة الأولى الحامية والضامنة للسلم والأمن الدوليين. ونحن بصدد الحديث عن المسؤوليات والواجبات التي يفرضها الظرف الحالي تجاه غزة، فلا ريب أن الأولوية القصوى تعود لوقف إطلاق النار الذي لا يمر يوم إلا وزاد الرفض والاستياء تجاه المماطلة بشأنه وتجاه المبررات الهشة لعدم إيلائه العناية التي يستحقها. فلا يوجد راهنا أهداف تعلو فوق هدف وقف العدوان والإبادة والتشريد والتهجير والتجويع والتدمير والتخريب والتدنيس. إذ ذاك فقط يصبح للحديث عن ترتيبات ما بعد الحرب معنى ويسمح للجهود الدبلوماسية الرامية لحل الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي فعلية وفاعلية. فمما لا شك فيه أن ما يحدث في غزة اليوم يعيد إلى الواجهة أكثر من أي وقت مضى حتمية الإسراع في معالجة جوهر هذا الصراع عبر تجديد وتفعيل التزامنا الجماعي بحل الدولتين الذي التفت حوله المجموعة الدولية كحل عادل ودائم ونهائي. وأمام الأصوات الإسرائيلية التي أصبحت تجاهر اليوم برفضها لهذا الحل، يقع على مجلسنا هذا وعلى منظمتنا هذه الرد بكل حزم وبكل صرامة على مثل هذه المواقف التي تستخف بالإجماع العالمي ولا تكن للشرعية الدولية سوى الإنكار والاحتقار. ومن هذا المنبر تجدد الجزائر دعمها لمنح العضوية الكاملة لدولة فلسطين بمنظمة الأمم المتحدة، وهو المطلب الذي تبنته حركة عدم الانحياز في قمتها الأخيرة كإجراء استعجالي للحفاظ على المرتكزات الأساسية لحل الدولتين، وكخطوة حتمية لصون المقومات القانونية لقيام الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة والسيدة على حدود 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. كما تدعو بلادي إلى تبني نهج جديد في السعي لتفعيل خيار السلام وتحقيق حل منصف وشامل للقضية الفلسطينية. فالجدير بل الأجدر بنا في هذه الساعات الفاصلة أن نتصدى للأوهام التي يتغذى منها الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الاستيطاني بتحقيق الأمن عبر القضاء على المشروع الوطني الفلسطيني. والجدير بل الأجدر بنا في هذه الساعات الفاصلة أن نمنع ونبطل تواصل حملات الاحتلال لمصادرة الأراضي الفلسطينية وضمها وتشجيع بناء المستوطنات الإسرائيلية وتوسيعها للحيلولة دون إمكانية قيام دولة فلسطينية مستقلة وسيدة. والجدير بل الأجدر بنا في هذه الساعات الفاصلة أن نكبح جماح الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وأوهامه المتمثلة في إعادة إحياء مشروع إسرائيل الكبرى على أنقاض ورماد وحطام المشروع الوطني الفلسطيني. بناء على كل هذه الاعتبارات فإن الجزائر تجدد المطلب التاريخي بعقد مؤتمر دولي للسلام تحت رعاية الأمم المتحدة يتم في إطاره الاتفاق على إنهاء الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي بصفة نهائية عبر الاحتكام لقرارات الشرعية الدولية وتفعيل حل الدولتين تحت الرقابة الصارمة والمتابعة اللصيقة والضمانة الوثيقة للمجتمع الدولي. فبعد غزة لا يمكن العودة إلى ما قبل غزة، وبعد غزة لا يمكن إعادة القضية الفلسطينية إلى أدراج لتبقى حبيسة فيها لأجل آخر غير مسمى. وبعد غزة لا يمكن أن نحصر الجهد الدولي في التكفل برواسب وتوابع ومخلفات الحرب ونغض الطرف عن أسباب ومسببات الحرب ذاتها. وفوق كل هذا وذاك لا يسمح لنا ولا يمكن أن نسمح لأنفسنا بأن نترك هدف السلم والأمن في الشرق الأوسط رهينة للاحتلال الإسرائيلي يتصرف فيها كيفما شاء ويساوم بها ما تشاء ويجامل بها من يشاء ويضغط بها على من يشاء. فلتكن غزة درسا لنا جميعا، درسا نقتدي به، ودرسا نستلهم منه، ودرسا نتقوى به في مساعينا الآتية. والأهم، فلتكن غزة درسا لا ننساه. شكرا لكم سيد الرئيس.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie son Excellence, Monsieur Attaf, sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence, Madame Tanja Fajon, vice-première ministre et ministre des Affaires étrangères et européennes de la Slovénie. Vous avez la parole.
I would like to start by thanking the Secretary General for his briefing and to you, Mr. Minister, for organizing this high-level debate. My message today is clear, and it is only one. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and in the region. So let me try to explain our reasoning behind the call for a ceasefire. Only a ceasefire respected by all parties to the conflict will bring about the protection of civilians. 100 days of the conflict have led to too many civilian casualties on all sides. 1 in every 100 Palestinians in Gaza has been killed. And enough is enough. The vast majority of those killed in Gaza are women and children. They are starving in overcrowded and unsafe shelters with a collapsed health system. Only a ceasefire will enable the delivery of humanitarian assistance at the scale required. The humanitarian community has an impossible mission while facing a multitude of challenges. If we want humanity to prevail, we must lay the foundations for a meaningful humanitarian action, and it's our collective responsibility. Only a ceasefire will provide for creating the conditions for the safe return of displaced people. Let me be clear that we reject and condemn statements by Israeli officials proposing the mass displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. However, we are also deeply concerned about the conditions internally displaced Palestinians in Gaza are living in. People are forced to flee and flee again, being pushed to safe zones which are later bombed. We need conditions for safe returns on all sides in Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Lebanon. Only a ceasefire and a renewed vision of a two-state solution will prevent the proliferation of extremism and extremist ideologies. Slovenia condemns all forms of terror, and Slovenia condemns the terrorist attacks of Hamas on 7 October, their continuing attacks on Israel, and we repeat our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and for granting the ICRC access to them. A ceasefire has to bring them home. And only a ceasefire will bring about the conditions for peace. The current hostilities and decades-long tensions are providing neither peace nor security for anyone in the region. There is no military solution to the conflict, and the only way to peace is a two-state solution. I therefore repeat my call to start preparing an international peace conference to address all the puzzle pieces of a two-state solution in a comprehensive manner. We have to be serious about that. We, as the Security Council, need to push forward discussions about the day after. Gaza and West Bank belongs to Palestinians. A ceasefire will also enable accountability. We cannot turn a blind eye to all the violations which have taken place in recent months. From the terrorist attack on 7th of October and accounts of sexual violence by Hamas to all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. A strong international legal system is a guarantee for international peace and security. Only a ceasefire would calm and help to calm the region. During my last speech at this council, I spoke of potential spillover. I'm afraid this conflict has already generated or served as a pretext to generate further escalation in the West Bank, along the Blue Line and in the Red Sea. We condemn Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, which must immediately cease. Freedom of navigation and maritime security are critically important for the movement of essential goods, including food, fuel, and critical humanitarian assistance intended to reach populations across the world. Tensions in the regions are mounting, and we will soon reach a point of no return. A ceasefire will enable reconstruction of Gaza under the leadership of a revitalized Palestinian Authority with the strong support of the UN and the international community. And with a ceasefire, I mean a process starting with a cessation of hostilities respected by all parties to the conflict and incorporating all of the above, leading to an independent Palestinian state, a safe and secure Israel, a peaceful region, and the people of all countries in the region living free of fear and terror. And Mr. President, 26,000 victims, Palestinian and Israeli alike, are not statistics. Each of them had a life, had family, dreams, hopes, and plans. And the best way for us to show respect to those who have lost their lives in this conflict is to pave the way for peace. It's time for a ceasefire. Thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence Madame Fajon sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à Son Excellence Monsieur Ignacio Cassis, conseiller fédéral et chef du département fédéral des affaires étrangères de la Suisse. Vous avez la parole.
Merci Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais tout d'abord remercier Monsieur le Secrétaire général pour sa présentation et j'aimerais également lui exprimer mes sincères condoléances pour la perte de ses 153 collaborateurs humanitaires. Excellence, la Suisse partage les principes de humanité et de paix qui guident l'action de ce Conseil. Nous réitérons la condamnation sans appel des attaques du Hamas contre Israël et exigeons la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages détenus par le Hamas. Les prises de parole qui s'enchaînent dans cette salle nous rappellent que nous avons atteint un niveau de haine et de souffrance extrême au Proche-Orient. Alors que depuis le 7 octobre dernier, la violence ne semble plus avoir de limite en Israël, à Gaza, comme dans tout le territoire palestinien occupé, une question me préoccupe particulièrement. Que pouvons-nous faire? Ce Conseil a certes adopté 2 résolutions essentielles, mais ne parvenons pas à les mettre en œuvre. En effet, seule une partie des otages a été libérée. Des civils continuent chaque jour d'être victimes de combats. Le droit international humanitaire est violé de manière continue, et ceci au moment du 75e anniversaire des conventions de Genève. Mesdames et messieurs, lorsqu'on se constate que malgré tous nos efforts, malgré toute l'énergie mise par ce Conseil dans l'adoption de ces 2 résolutions, lorsqu'on constate que la violence se poursuit, il n'y a qu'un mot qui me vient à l'esprit, c'est le mot frustration. Mais nous ne pouvons pas céder à la frustration. Nous ne pouvons pas nous laisser décourager. Face à un tel degré d'inhumanité, nous n'en avons pas le droit. Pour parvenir à dégager ensemble une piste de solution à la hauteur de nos responsabilités, nous devons prendre du recul et affronter sans tabou les blocages qui empêchent ce Conseil de faire son travail. Je souhaite souligner 3 points essentiels à prendre en compte sur le chemin d'une paix durable au Proche-Orient. Premièrement, Le monde a changé. Le Moyen-Orient n'est plus ce qu'il était au moment des accords de Camp David ou d'Oslo. Les États de cette région ont beaucoup évolué. Ils expriment des aspirations légitimes. Ces États veulent aujourd'hui jouer un rôle clé. Aucune paix durable au Proche-Orient ne sera ainsi possible sans un consensus politique régional. Deuxièmement, Israël a développé une nouvelle dynamique diplomatique régionale. J'y vois là un signe que des terrains d'entente politique existent, que des intérêts communs sont mutuellement reconnus, aussi bien pour le peuple israélien que pour le peuple palestinien. Enfin, troisièmement, le fondement d'une paix durable reste la création d'une solution à deux États. C'est la solution qui donnera tant aux Israéliens qu'aux Palestiniens la perspective de vivre en paix et sécurité. Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues, il y a une citation d'Eleanor Roosevelt que j'aimerais vous lire. It isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it. Nous ne pouvons plus nous contenter de gérer ce conflit. L'impasse dans laquelle nous sommes aujourd'hui à Gaza nous le prouve. Nous avons atteint un point de bascule. Nous devons désormais faire de nouveaux pas concrets vers la résolution politique de ce conflit qui a déjà coûté la vie à beaucoup trop de personnes. Et comment agir concrètement? Je plaide pour une approche commune. Nous devons tous y travailler. Les parties au conflit, les États de la région, je souligne, et les membres de ce Conseil. Nous devons imaginer ensemble le futur sur la base d'une approche globale qui contient tous les éléments clés du conflit. J'entends ici la libération des otages restants, le cessez-le-feu humanitaire, l'accès sans entrave à l'aide humanitaire, le respect sans entrave du droit international humanitaire, et le tout sur la toile de fond d'une solution politique. Je suis bien conscient que ces éléments font partie des préoccupations de ce Conseil, mais nous devons les penser dans une nouvelle géographie de la paix. Monsieur le Président, votre pays, la France, est le berceau des Lumières. Vous comprendrez certainement ma démarche qui voit dans la critique et la remise en question le moteur qui nous permettra d'avancer au-delà des obstacles pour atteindre cette lumière qu'est la paix. Je suis convaincu que nous tous, ici auprès de l'ONU, avons la capacité de nous retrouver, de changer le regard. Certains trouveront cela utopique. Moi, je préfère l'utopie à la dystopie. À vos côtés, avec les Israéliens, les Palestiniens et les États de la région, la Suisse est prête à jouer son rôle dans ce processus difficile mais indispensable pour la paix. Nous nous tenons prêts à réunir les acteurs clés de ce conflit et à soutenir tout effort à même de bâtir le chemin vers la paix, comme par exemple celui annoncé hier par l'Union européenne. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie Son Excellence, M. Kassi, de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à Son Excellence, M. Sergey Lavrov, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Fédération de Russie. Monsieur Lavrov, c'est à vous.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель, уважаемый генеральный секретарь, дамы и господа. Мы сегодня проводим заседание по ситуации на Ближнем Востоке, прежде всего по палестинскому вопросу. Заседаем мы и ведем дискуссию в поистине драматический момент. Не только соображения большой политики, но и общечеловеческая мораль требует от нас принятия срочных мер для прекращения огня и страдания людей в Палестине. Равным образом востребованы шаги, направленные на недопущение дальнейшей дестабилизации обстановки в других частях Ближнего Востока. До сих пор наш Совет не смог дать адекватный ответ на этот поистине судьбоносный вызов. Причина известна, она состоит в позиции Соединенных Штатов, блокирующих все усилия и инициативы по остановке кровопролития на оккупированных территориях. Вызывает оторопь, изворотливость американской дипломатии, которая то ветирует резолюции о прекращении огня, то призывает к снижению интенсивности боевых действий в Газе. Ясно, что это дает карт-бланш на продолжение коллективного наказания палестинцев. Накануне нашего заседания мы предприняли еще одну попытку добиться солидарной реакции Совета на происходящее и предложили проект заявления председателя с требованием немедленного гуманитарного прекращения огня. Однако США и их союзники этот документ тоже заблокировали, подтвердив, по сути дела, что сохранение жизни мирных палестинцев в их приоритеты не входит. Гуманитарные последствия такой политики ужасны. Погибли почти 30 тысяч мирных жителей, в том числе огромное количество женщин и детей. Север Газы практически полностью разрушен и непригоден для жизни. 80% всего населения сектора – это внутренне перемещенные лица. Настоящая человеческая трагедия, конца которой не видно. Угрожающие масштабы приобрел дефицит всего жизненно необходимого. Хотел бы также привлечь ваше внимание к статье в газете «Jerusalem Post» от 5 января этого года, которую написала профессор университета Бен-Гуриона госпожа Мицан. Она раньше работала координатором Всемирной организации здравоохранения по чрезвычайным ситуациям. Статья основывается на оценках экспертов-экологов, включая израильских специалистов. Оценки заставляют усомниться, что Газа когда-нибудь будет пригодна для жизни после завершения конфликта. В результате бомбардировок почва, грунтовые воды, прибрежная морская акватория, атмосфера уже беспрецедентно загрязнены толстым слоем из продуктов взрывов и горения, уничтоженной техники и боеприпасов, химикатов, разлагающейся биомассы, как бы жутко это ни звучало, бытовых отходов и канализационных вод. Исчезли естественные источники питьевой воды. Фактически уничтожена канализационная инфраструктура, и по оценкам 22% сельскохозяйственных земель Газы уже никогда не будут восстановлены. Зафиксировано десятки тысяч случаев диареи, острых респираторных заболеваний, чесотки, кожной сыпи и других болезней. Резко возрос риск эпидемий. Отсутствие гуманитарного доступа признано Всемирной организацией здравоохранения главным препятствием для доставки гуманитарной помощи. В частности, ВОЗ отменила 6 запланированных гуманитарных миссий в северную часть сектора Газа всего лишь с конца декабря, поскольку соответствующие запросы были отклонены. С целью облегчить страдания жителей Газа Россия, как и ряд других стран, направила в сектор сотни тонн продовольствия, медицинских изделий, лекарств. Поддерживаем действующих на местах сотрудников ООНовских гуманитарных агентств, которые, к большому прискорбию, также становятся жертвами войны, включая 150 погибших, о чем недавно говорил генеральный секретарь, охарактеризовав эту цифру как беспрецедентную в истории участия ООН в различных операциях в зонах конфликта. Особую тревогу вызывает муссирование таких отвратительных идей, как насильственное перемещение всех палестинцев из мест их постоянного проживания. Подобный сценарий недопустим и не должен быть реализован ни при каких обстоятельствах. Следует также немедленно остановить приобретающий массовый характер насилия со стороны израильской армии и еврейских поселенцев на западном берегу реки Иордан, а также исключить любые попытки подорвать статус-кво иерусалимских святынь. Неспособность нашего Совета к принятию исчерпывающих мер приводит к тому, что нынешнее обострение конфликта в Палестине дало метастазы по всему региону. Причем вновь не без пагубного участия Соединенных Штатов и их союзников, чье военное присутствие на Ближнем Востоке, как и в других частях Евразийского континента, создает все новые неприемлемые риски для международной безопасности. Категорически осуждаем ничем не оправданную агрессию против Йемена, предпринятую при ведущей роли Вашингтона и Лондона без санкций Совета Безопасности. Эти действия англосаксов представляют собой прямую угрозу международному миру, подрывают миропорядок, основанный не на их правилах, а на верховенстве универсального международного права и на центральной роли Объединенных Наций. Осуждаем также израильские бомбардировки Сирии, в том числе удары, целями которых декларируются структуры, легально находящиеся в этой стране по приглашению ее законного правительства. Политические убийства должны быть прекращены. Взрывоопасная ситуация и на границе Ливана с Израилем. Очевидно, что односторонние силовые акции лишь усугубляют и без того тяжелое положение дел в регионе. Положение, которое сложилось не сегодня и отражает многолетнюю историю. Речь идет о многократных вторжениях американцев и их сателлитов в независимые государства, которые привели к сотням тысяч погибших в Ираке, разрушению государственности Ливии, к войне в Сирии, огромным потокам беженцев, беспрецедентному всплеску международного терроризма, в том числе на африканском континенте. Россия не приемлет террористические проявления в любых формах. Мы категорически осудили нападение на мирных граждан в Израиле 7 октября 2023 года. В отличие от некоторых западных коллег, которые исповедуют двойные стандарты, мы не делим экстремистов на плохих и хороших, на своих и чужих. Настаиваем на освобождении всех удерживаемых в Газе, независимо от их национальности и происхождения. Сегодня все чаще слышим, прежде всего от западных представителей, призывы сосредоточиться не на сегодняшнем, а на завтрашнем дне, так называемый the day after палестино-израильского конфликта. Как будто бы эскалация в Газе уже прекратилась, и обстановка там якобы больше не требует внимания Совета. Но лукавая логика западных делегаций очевидна. Заблокировав все столь остро необходимые усилия Совета призвать стороны к прекращению огня, США и их союзники хотят как можно скорее перевернуть это крайне неудобную для себя страницу, которая делает их соучастниками бойни, развязанной против мирного населения в Газе. Хочу подчеркнуть, Совет Безопасности по-прежнему должен выполнить свой мандат и призвать к прекращению огня. Иначе нет никакой гарантии, что боевые действия не возобновятся с новой силой. А в отсутствии такой гарантии, равно как и безоговорочного выполнения решения ООН о создании палестинского государства, все разговоры про завтрашний день не только преждевременны, но и беспредметны. И это прекрасно понимают потенциальные доноры, которые могли бы вложиться в будущее восстановление Газы. Когда же дело дойдет до рассуждений о параметрах так называемого завтрашнего дня, то принципиальное значение должны иметь следующие факторы. Во-первых, консолидированная воля самого палестинского народа. Палестинцы, на протяжении десятилетий, лишенные шанса на государственность, заслужили, чтобы этот вопрос наконец был решен. Первое и главное условие для этого – единство самой палестинской нации. Мы верим, что наши палестинские братья и сестры проявят стратегическую мудрость и откажутся от всех конъюнктурных соображений, междоусобиц, которые препятствуют национальному строительству. Они должны сами решать, как должно выглядеть их будущее государство, кто и как должен им управлять. По-моему, наши западные коллеги называют это демократией. Навязывание решений извне и столь любимый Западом социальный инжиниринг категорически неприемлем. При этом не менее важно единство позиций всех внешних игроков, которые должны руководствоваться не своими политическими интересами и замыслами в регионе, пытаясь транслировать эти замыслы через те или иные палестинские фракции, а императивом поиска